Hello, my name is Ava Monroe, and if you're listening to this thinking, it could never happen to me, that's exactly what I used to say right up until the day my husband smiled at me across a courtroom like a stranger, and I realized I had handed the wrong man the keys to a fortune. I wasn't born into fairy tale money, the flashy kind with champagne and paparazzi. I was born into the quiet kind. Assets, deeds, coastlines, old ports that look sleepy on the surface and priceless underneath. My father built it the way serious people build empires, piece by piece, patient, legal, invisible, and when he died, the portfolio didn't come to me as a check. It came as control. Harbors, shipping-adjacent land, warehouses, long leases, mineral rights near the water, the kind of holdings governments track and corporations court. And by the time the accountants put a clean number on it, it totaled $3.2 billion in value. I learned early that money doesn't just buy comfort, it buys attention, and attention is dangerous. My father used to say, "Never tell people what you own, Ava. Tell them what you do." So I became the woman who managed family property, the woman who sat on boards, the woman who kept things organized. And that was my camouflage. Then I met Lucas Monroe at a charity gala that wasn't really charity. It was networking with better lighting. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He wasn't the richest. He wasn't the most handsome in a movie star way, but he was calm. So calm, it felt like silence had manners when it sat near him. He asked thoughtful questions, not about my money, not about my last name, but about the coast, the shipping lanes, the way storms change shorelines over time. I remember thinking, he listens like he's not trying to win anything, and that thought was the first thread he used to sew himself into my life. Lucas didn't chase me, he didn't rush me, he didn't love bomb me, he just stayed present, steady, reliable, the way a lighthouse stays quiet, consistent, impossible to ignore after a while. Friends told me he was a good one, and my mother, who had seen too many pretty liars in her lifetime, said, "At least he doesn't perform," and I took that as approval. We married within a year, and people called it romantic, but I'll tell you the truth. It was strategic, and not just for him. Yes, he wanted what came with me, but I wanted what I believed came with him. Discretion, composure, a partner who could sit across from sharks and never blink. We never spoke the ugly words out loud. Deal, leverage, protection, but they lived between us like a third person at the table. After we married, I didn't give Lucas immediate access to the full portfolio. I'm not naive, I'm just human. So I set boundaries and structures, trusts, signatures, layers, checks, and he didn't complain. That should have been my first warning. Most men who want control get angry when you slow them down. But Lucas didn't get angry. He got interested, like a student studying for an exam he intended to ace. He'd sit beside me while I reviewed documents and say, "Show me how you prefer it," and I'd feel proud. Like I was training my own ally, like I was building something safe. Still, a part of me stayed guarded, and because I'm being honest, I'll admit my own sin. I created my own hidden safety net, a private holding company with directors I trusted, paperwork that looked clean, routes for transferring control if I ever needed to. I told myself it wasn't deceit, it was insurance. The same way you lock your doors at night, even if you love your neighborhood. I thought I was being careful. I didn't realize I was teaching Lucas the exact shape of my fear. Our life looked perfect from the outside. Tasteful home, tasteful parties, tasteful vacations that weren't posted online. Lucas played the role of devoted husband flawlessly, the kind who refills your glass without you noticing, who rests a hand at your back when cameras appear, who calls you love in a soft voice that makes strangers smile. Behind the scenes, he was also doing something else, watching. Not the obvious watching where a man checks your phone or questions your friends, but the patient kind. He noticed what accounts I checked first in the morning, what documents I left on my desk when I was tired, which advisors I trusted without double-checking, and what names made me tense when they appeared on email threads. When I spoke, Lucas stored my words like currency. When I relaxed, Lucas learned my habits. And while I was busy making sure my wealth stayed protected, Lucas was quietly mapping the system, protecting it. The first fracture happened on an ordinary Tuesday, no dramatic storm, no screaming argument, just an email with a polite subject line and a cold body. Notice of review. At first, I thought it was a routine audit, one of those corporate nuisances that arrives like junk mail. But then I saw the sender. A legal office I didn't recognize, and attached was a filing with my name and Lucas's name printed like they belonged to two opposing teams. I called my attorney immediately. He was unusually quiet as he read it, and when he spoke, his voice had that careful tone people use when they're about to deliver a death. "Ava," he said, "your husband filed for an injunction and claims there's been attempted concealment of marital assets." Concealment. The word hit me like a slap because it didn't feel like a word that should ever be connected to my life. Not openly, not on paper. I drove home so fast I don't remember the streets. I only remember my hands tightening on the wheel and my heartbeat refusing to calm down. Lucas was in the kitchen when I arrived, sleeves rolled up like a man who had been chopping vegetables, and for one stupid second, I thought the email was some mistake, some bureaucratic confusion that would dissolve when I showed him. He looked up and smiled gently, and the gentleness was the most terrifying part. "You got it," he said, not asking, stating. "Lucas," I whispered, "what is this?" He didn't deny, didn't act confused, didn't even pretend. He washed his hands slowly, dried them, and said, "We need to do this properly." Properly. Like betrayal had etiquette. That night I didn't sleep. I went through files and messages, I pulled statements and old emails, I traced every move I had made over the past year, and what I realized, slowly, sickly, was that Lucas had been laying tracks underneath me the whole time. He knew about my holding company. How? Because I hadn't been careful enough. Because I trusted the wrong administrator, because Lucas didn't need access to my mind when he had access to my environment. In court, it unfolded like a script he'd rehearsed for months. Lucas's lawyers presented not just evidence of my private structure, but audio of my voice discussing transfers, discussing keeping control, discussing how Lucas doesn't need to know everything. The audio was clean. The timestamps were organized. The context was arranged like a narrative, and the narrative was simple. Ava Monroe married Lucas Monroe and attempted to hide $3.2 billion in assets to keep him from a rightful claim. The judge didn't care about my tone, my fear, my history. Courts don't care about feelings when paperwork speaks louder. I tried to explain that my structure was protection, not theft, but Lucas's team had a second story ready. Lucas was the loyal husband who supported my work, and I was the calculating wife who treated marriage like a business. The sick part was that the story wasn't even completely false, because yes, I had treated marriage like a business, and Lucas had simply decided to be better at it. Then Lucas testified, quiet, composed, looking straight ahead as if truth were a straight road and lies were just scenery. He spoke about trust, about partnership, about transparency, and I wanted to laugh because he used my favorite words like weapons. And then the final blow, Lucas's lawyer played a recording where my voice said, casually, carelessly, "He trusts me too much." I felt my stomach drop like an elevator cable snapped. The courtroom murmured. The judge's face hardened. At that moment, I understood the kind of man I had married. Not a man who panics, not a man who explodes, but a man who waits until the exact second your own words can be turned into a noose. The ruling came faster than my mind could process. Temporary control transferred pending final determination. Then, as hearings continued, the intent to conceal became the centerpiece. And intent is everything in law. The judge concluded that my actions undermined the marital financial agreement, and when the final order landed, it felt like the end of a life. Control of the contested holdings transferred to Lucas Monroe. The $3.2 billion wasn't just a headline. It was my father's life turned into someone else's leverage. People assume I must have screamed or cried or thrown a glass, but I didn't, because I was too shocked to perform pain. I sat in my car afterward and stared at my hands, and I kept thinking, how did I lose without losing a single argument? Because the truth was, Lucas hadn't beaten me with force. He beat me with calm. And the calm made everyone believe him. For weeks after that, I moved through my home like a ghost, watching Lucas live in the life I thought we shared. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He didn't insult me or threaten me. He simply behaved like he had already won, and it was impolite to mention it. One morning, he placed a cup of coffee on the counter in front of me. My favorite, exactly how I take it, and said softly, "This doesn't have to be ugly." That was the moment my grief turned into something sharper. Because he still thought he could manage my emotions like accounts. He still believed I would accept this the way a polite woman accepts a bad apology. I looked at him and realized something that changed everything. Lucas didn't want to destroy me publicly. He wanted to keep me alive and quiet, a witness that would never speak. A woman who would carry the shame alone so he could carry the assets without noise. If I had been the Ava he expected, the one who panics, the one who begs, I would have collapsed exactly as he planned. But I wasn't done. I went silent, and I let him believe the silence meant surrender. I smiled at dinners. I answered texts with polite words. I stopped arguing. I became the calm wife again, because calm is a language Lucas trusted. While he relaxed, I rebuilt. I hired a different kind of help, people who don't wear suits to intimidate judges, people who sit in small rooms with laptops and find the fingerprints others miss, a forensic accountant, a private investigator with no interest in my feelings, a specialist who traced corporate structures like bloodlines. I didn't tell them I wanted revenge, I told them I wanted truth, because truth is the only weapon that doesn't jam. And the truth that surfaced made my breath catch. Lucas hadn't just been protecting himself against my concealment. Lucas had been moving pieces long before he filed anything. He had leveraged relationships with port contractors. He had quietly renegotiated service agreements. He had met with potential buyers as a representative, presenting himself as the stable, reliable manager while I was the emotional owner. Worst of all, there was a woman, Serena, not a dramatic mistress with lipstick on collars, but an executive in a consulting firm that suddenly had contracts tied to my properties. And her email trails with Lucas weren't romantic, they were operational. She wasn't the other woman in a movie sense. She was the other partner. The day I saw their message thread, something in me turned cold. Lucas wasn't stealing for love or lust, he was stealing for strategy. That made him more dangerous, and it also made him predictable, because strategy always leaves patterns. My team found discrepancies, small at first, contract bid processes that looked off, invoices with rounded numbers, shell vendors with matching addresses. We followed those threads, and they led to a network of service companies that all traced back to the same private mailbox and the same quiet bank. Lucas had built a pipeline, not just to take control once, but to siphon value continuously. And that meant he had a vulnerability. If those pipelines were exposed, his whole clean image would crack. I didn't go back to court immediately. The court is loud, and loud gives a man like Lucas time to prepare speeches. Instead, I went where Lucas never expected me to go, the people who hated risk more than they loved profit. I met with his business partners, quietly, one by one, under the polite excuse of clarifying transitional responsibilities. I didn't accuse Lucas emotionally. I showed them numbers. I showed them patterns. I asked calm questions like, "Do you know why this vendor's address matches this mailbox?" And I watched their faces change as the calm turned to fear, because fear is what happens when wealthy men realize they're attached to someone else's fraud. Then I went one step higher. I didn't call the tabloids, I didn't call my friends, I called regulators. Not in a vengeful voice, but in a careful one. The same careful voice Lucas used when he wanted to sound trustworthy. I filed reports with documents attached. I made sure the packet was clean, simple, undeniable, and then I waited because systems move slowly. But when they move, they crush. Lucas still didn't suspect. He still wore his calm like armor. He still walked through meetings as if the world belonged to him. Then, one afternoon, he came home with a different face, still controlled but tight around the edges, like a man holding his breath underwater. "Ava," he said, "have you spoken to anyone?" I looked up from my book and blinked slowly, acting confused. "About what?" I asked. That's when I saw it, the first crack in the lighthouse. He tried to stay soft. "There's attention," he said. "Questions." I closed my book. "Questions are normal," I said. "You taught me that." His jaw tightened for half a second. He recovered. "I don't want this to hurt you," he said. And I almost laughed because that was the lie he told himself to sleep at night, that he was protecting me from the mess he created. "It's already hurt me," I replied quietly, and then I stood and walked past him like he wasn't the center of my universe anymore. Over the next week, the calls started for him. Missed calls, then urgent voicemails, then meetings he couldn't postpone. Partners demanded explanations. Contracts were paused. A routine review became a deeper one. Serena stopped answering his texts, and then finally, the moment arrived that felt like a door opening in a burning house. Lucas came home late, not with anger, but with a strange, shaken politeness. "We need to talk," he said. I sat at the table like we were strangers signing a deal. "I'm listening," I told him. He stared at my face like he was searching for the old Ava, the one who would panic. "Did you do this?" he asked. I didn't ask what this was. I didn't need to. I tilted my head and said, "Lucas, remember when you told me this didn't have to be ugly?" He swallowed. "Ava," he began, and I cut him off softly. I learned something from you. He frowned. What? He whispered. I leaned forward just enough for him to feel the chill. Silence is power, I said, until it isn't. His eyes flicked, calculating. If you think you can scare me, he started. I'm not trying to scare you, I said. I'm letting you meet the version of me you created. For the first time in our marriage, Lucas looked unsure, and that uncertainty, small, brief, was more satisfying than any scream. But here's the part people don't understand about revenge. It doesn't heal you. It just changes the shape of your pain. Even as Lucas's world started to wobble, I still woke up some mornings with my father's voice in my head, telling me to protect what he built, and I would feel grief like a bruise under my ribs. I would see my mother's face at my wedding, hopeful, and I would feel shame like heat in my throat. Some nights I stood by the window and watched the ocean in the distance and wondered if I had been foolish to ever believe marriage could be safe with a man who studies weakness like it's a skill. Lucas tried to regain control. Of course he did. He offered settlements. He offered apologies. He offered to share the assets like a generous king. He even said we could start over, and I realized he still saw love as a reset button, not a promise. I kept my expression neutral and said, no. The word tasted like freedom. Then came the letter, a plain envelope delivered to me, not to Lucas. No return address, just my name written neatly like someone wanted it to look personal. Inside was a single page and a small flash drive. The page had one sentence. If you want the full truth, listen to track 3. My hands went cold. Track 3. On what? I plugged the drive into my laptop, and a folder opened with several audio files labeled in dates. My chest tightened as I recognized Lucas's voice in the first few seconds. Calm, confident, planning. Then I heard Serena's voice. Then another man. Then a name that made my blood drain from my face. My father's old advisor, the one who had been around since I was a teenager. I sat back, stunned, as the audio revealed something I hadn't even considered. Something that didn't just explain Lucas's moves, but rewrote the beginning of my story. Because in that recording, Lucas said words that made my stomach turn. She thinks she inherited it clean. She doesn't know how it was arranged. I replayed it. My fingers trembled. Arranged? I clicked track 3. The sound started with a chair scraping, then Lucas speaking lower, more serious, and Serena answering like this was business, not romance. And then Lucas said, when Ava finds out, she'll break. Keep her close. Keep her quiet. My throat tightened as if the air changed. Find out what? Keep me close? Keep me quiet? I stared at the screen, the audio still running, and realized the revenge I thought I was executing might have been only the first layer of something bigger. Something that began before my father died, before I married Lucas, before I even knew what my inheritance truly meant. I closed the laptop slowly, like the sound of it could trigger a trap, and I looked around my quiet house, suddenly unsure which parts of my life were mine and which parts were staged for me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Don't confront him yet. He's not your final problem. My heart was hammered. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and for a long time I just stared at my own face, trying to recognize the woman looking back. Because if Lucas had been lying since the beginning, then the ending I planned wasn't the ending that was coming. And as I reached for my coat, ready to drive into the night to meet the person who had sent the drive, I heard the front door unlock slowly, carefully, like someone coming home who believed they still owned the place. And I realized that whatever happens next, it's going to be the moment everything finally shows its true face. And if you think you know how this ends, trust me, you don't. If you were in her place, what would you do next? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe.